She is impulsive, sharp-tongued, and an expert at turning nerves into disaster. He is sarcastic, smug, and clearly born with a talent for provoking people. They work together, argue like it is a sport, and trade barbs with almost professional efficiency. Everyone around them can already tell that this constant friction carries far too much energy to be just hate. The only thing missing is for two people to admit it. Unfortunately, those two happen to be the most stubborn in the office. The coffee was already tilting. Stella Marshall gripped the steering wheel with one hand and pressed the to-go cup against the dashboard with the other, as if willpower alone could keep the lid from surrendering. Her bag sat open on the passenger seat, zipper broken since Tuesday, spilling pens and crumpled receipts onto the floor mat every time she turned. 8:47 a.m. Her first day at Whitmore and Associates started at 8:30. She swung into the parking lot too fast, tires squealing against the asphalt. But there it was, third row left side, a spot, wide, empty, practically glowing under the morning sun. She hit the turn signal, adjusted the wheel, and then a black sports car slid in from the opposite direction and took it. Just like that. She sat there, blinking. The engine of the other car went silent. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair that looked like he had spent exactly 0 effort on it, and still ended up on the right side of effortless. He leaned against the hood, took a slow sip of his coffee, and looked directly at her windshield. He smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a sorry about that smile. The kind that said he knew exactly what he had done and found it entertaining. Stella honked. He raised his cup in her direction. A toast. She shoved the car into park, grabbed her bag, which immediately dropped 3 highlighters onto the pavement, and marched toward him. The morning air smelled like fresh asphalt and gasoline, and the sun was already warm enough to make her blouse stick to her back. That was my spot. Was it? He glanced at the empty space behind her car. I don't see your name on it. I had my signal on, and I had my car in it. He checked his watch, the gesture slow, deliberate, theatrical. Who gets here first chooses first. Law of the jungle. She opened her mouth, but her coffee, the traitorous, overpriced, barely held-together coffee, chose that exact moment to tilt past the point of no return. The lid popped. A wave of lukewarm latte splashed down the front of her white blouse. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. She looked down. He laughed. Not a small laugh. A full head-back, shoulders-shaking laugh that bounced off the concrete walls of the parking structure. I will hate you forever, she said. And she meant it with every stained fiber of her shirt. He was still laughing when she turned on her heel and walked away, coffee dripping from her sleeve, highlighters forgotten on the ground, and a year-long war declared in silence. 1 year later, she still had not broken that promise. Not entirely. Isaac Cooper was a structural engineer at Whitmore and Associates, the kind who walked into meetings 5 minutes late, with the confidence of someone who had been there for an hour. He argued with contractors the way other people argued about football, and had the irritating habit of being right about things Stella wanted him to be wrong about. She was the firm's interior architect. Her work was texture and light, color theory and spatial flow. His work was steel and concrete. They clashed on nearly every joint project, and Whitmore's open-plan office meant there was nowhere to hide. The ceiling height won't support your pendant concept, he told her once during a review meeting, not even looking up from his laptop. It will, if you stop designing ceilings for people who live underground. He looked up then. Just a flash, his eyes catching hers with something that hovered between annoyance and amusement. The office had learned to bring snacks to their meetings. The arguments were long, specific, and weirdly entertaining. Gary from accounting once said it was better than anything on television. Linda from HR started a quiet betting pool, not about who would win the arguments, but about how long before the two of them either destroyed each other or ended up together. Stella would have been horrified. What she did know was this: Isaac Cooper was arrogant, presumptuous, and annoyingly funny. He never raised his voice, which somehow made everything worse. And his hands, she noticed once during a presentation, when he pointed at a flaw in her layout, were steady in a way that made her own feel restless. She did not like noticing that. He, for his part, had catalogued more about Stella Marshall than he would ever admit. The way she twisted a silver ring on her right hand when she was thinking, the sharp edge in her voice when she was nervous, disguised as authority. The faint smell of vanilla that followed her down the hallway. Not perfume, he had decided. Lotion, maybe. Something she put on without thinking about. He did not like noticing that either. So they kept their distance, wrapped in sarcasm. They traded jabs across conference tables and borrowed each other's frustration like a language only they spoke. And if anyone at Whitmore thought there was something more buried beneath the daily warfare, well, neither Isaac nor Stella was about to be the one who proved them right. The copy machine on the third floor jammed every Tuesday without fail, which meant that every Tuesday Stella stood beside it, with her hip pressed against the side panel, waiting for it to groan back to life. It was during one of these Tuesday rituals that she heard the words that would ruin her week. "He's choosing the new lead architect soon," said a voice from the other side of the partition. Dana Thornton from Project Coordination, the kind of woman who always knew things 48 hours before anyone else. Like, soon, before the end of the quarter. Stella's hand froze on the paper tray. "Who's in the running?" asked another voice. "Rebecca, maybe, one of the junior designers. Anyone with senior status, but you know how Martin is." Dana's voice dropped to that specific pitch people used when they were sharing something they shouldn't. "He doesn't just look at portfolios. He looks at people. Responsibility, stability. He wants someone with their head on straight, someone who's got their life together. So basically a grown-up." Basically. Stella pulled her copies from the tray and walked back to her desk, with her pulse tapping against her wrists. Responsibility, stability, someone with their life together. She sat down and stared at her screen without seeing a single line on it. She was good at her job. She knew that. Her last 3 projects had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. Her design for the Haverford Building lobby had been featured in an industry journal. But Martin Wells, the kind, silver-haired founder of Whitmore and Associates, valued more than talent. He valued character, dependability. The kind of person who showed up the same way every day, steady as a metronome. And Stella, on her best days, was more like a pinball. She tried to shake the thought. Went back to her floor plans. Opened her email. Closed it. Opened it again. The words kept circling. Responsibility, stability, head on straight. A relationship. That's what it sounded like. Someone grounded, someone settled, someone who had their personal life in order, not someone who ate cereal standing over the sink at 11 at night and forgot to pay her electricity bill twice in the same month. She told herself not to do anything impulsive. She told herself to breathe. 20 minutes later, she was standing outside Martin's office with her heart hammering against her chest, knocking on the frosted glass door with knuckles that had gone pale. "Stella, come in." Martin smiled from behind his wide oak desk. His office smelled like leather and old books, and the late afternoon light turned the dust motes into something almost golden. "What can I do for you?" She had planned to ask about the Belmont project. She had rehearsed the question in her head 3 times on the walk over, a simple professional question about timelines and material selections. What came out was, "I'm engaged." The words left her mouth before her brain could catch them. They just fell out. Like the coffee that morning a year ago, tilting past the edge before she could grab it. Martin's face changed instantly. His eyebrows lifted. His mouth spread into a wide, warm smile. He leaned back in his chair and pressed his hands together. "Stella, that is wonderful news, wonderful." She stood there frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of the folder she had brought as a prop. "Thank you. I'm very happy." "Who's the lucky man?" Her stomach dropped. He works in... He's great. Really great." Martin didn't press. Instead, he stood up and walked around the desk, placing a hand on her shoulder like a proud uncle. "You know, I love a good love story. My wife and I met at a company dinner 41 years ago." His eyes softened. "Speaking of which, the annual company dinner is in 2 weeks. I want you there, with him. I'd love to meet the man who finally tamed our Stella." The word tamed scraped against her ears, but she smiled anyway. "Of course, we'll be there." "Fantastic." He squeezed her shoulder. "I'm happy for you. Truly. She walked out of the office with her back straight and her smile fixed in place. Made it down the hall, turned the corner, pushed open the bathroom door. Then she gripped the sink with both hands and stared at her own reflection. Her face was white. "What did you just do?" she whispered. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The faucet dripped. Her reflection offered no answers. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to produce a fiancé she did not have, for a dinner she could not skip, in front of a boss who believed every word she had just said. She pressed her forehead against the cold mirror and closed her eyes. The glass fogged with her breath. Somewhere down the hallway, she could hear the copy machine jam again. And somewhere on the floor below, Isaac Cooper was reviewing structural plans with his feet on his desk, and not a single complication in his evening. That would change soon enough. 3 names were on the list. By Thursday, all 3 were crossed out. The first was Kevin Park, a friend from college who owed her a favor and had the kind of dependable face that screamed fiancé material. She called him on Tuesday night, pacing her apartment in socks that didn't match, rehearsing the ask in her head. Kevin picked up on the 4th ring. "Kev, I need a huge favor." "Anything, as long as it's not this weekend. I'm flying to Denver." "When are you back?" 3 weeks. She hung up and drew a slow, careful line through his name. The second was her cousin Marco, who lived in Portland and had once pretended to be her boyfriend at a family reunion to keep her aunt from setting her up with a dentist named Larry. He was perfect, charming, convincing, and he already knew her well enough to fake it. Marco answered with enthusiasm, then checked his calendar. "Stell, I'm in the middle of a move, literally surrounded by boxes. I can barely find my shoes." She crossed his name out harder than necessary. The pen tore through the paper. The third option was a grey area. She had spent 45 minutes on her laptop scrolling through an agency that provided +1s for corporate events, professional companions, actors, basically. The website looked polished enough. The reviews were decent. But the moment she imagined introducing a hired stranger to Martin Wells, a man who could read a handshake like a polygraph test, her stomach flipped and she slammed the laptop shut. Too risky. Way too risky. By Friday afternoon, Stella Marshall had no fiancé, no backup plan, and 11 days until the dinner. She sat in the file room on the 2nd floor with the door half closed, surrounded by archive boxes and the stale smell of old paper. The fluorescent light above her flickered every few seconds, a small rhythmic annoyance that matched the pulse behind her eyes. She held the list in both hands and stared at the crossed-out names like they might rearrange themselves into a solution. "Come on," she muttered. "Think. Think. Think." She didn't hear the door open. Talking to yourself is usually the 3rd sign. Her head snapped up. Isaac stood in the doorway, one shoulder leaning against the frame, arms loose at his sides. He wore a grey Henley with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, and his hair looked like he'd run his hand through it one too many times during the day. "Third sign of what?" she asked, already defensive. "Depends on who you ask." He stepped inside and glanced at the box she had been pretending to search through. Looking for something. A file for the Belmont project, with a list of men's names. She looked down. The list was face up on her lap, completely visible. Kevin, Marco, and the words, "Hire someone," written in capital letters with 3 question marks. She snatched it and pressed it against her chest. "It's nothing." He held out his hand. Not demanding. Patient. Like someone offering to hold an umbrella for a person standing in the rain and refusing to admit it was raining. She didn't move. He tilted his head. "Marshall." Something in the way he said her last name, steady, low, without the usual edge, made her hand relax. He took the list from her fingers, unfolded it and read it in silence. It took him about 30 seconds. His eyebrows lifted once. His mouth twitched. Then he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name, somewhere between disbelief and something dangerously close to delight. "You told Wells you're engaged." It wasn't a question. "It was an accident," she said. "An accident." I panicked. He folded the list and handed it back. Then he crossed his arms, shifted his weight, and studied her the way he studied blueprints. Carefully from every angle, taking his time. She braced for the mockery. The smirk, the slow, devastating one-liner that would follow her down the hallway for months. Instead, he said, "I'll do it." She blinked. "What?" "The dinner. The fiancé thing." He shrugged one shoulder, as if he were agreeing to help move a couch. "I'll do it. No. You don't have a better option. I'll find one. Your list says otherwise." He nodded at the crumpled paper in her hand. 3 names, all crossed out, and a plan to hire a stranger that you already talked yourself out of. Face it, Marshall. I'm the best option you're ever going to find. The arrogance in that sentence should have made her scream. Instead, it landed with the dull thud of truth. She rubbed her forehead. There would be rules. Obviously. Serious rules. You'd have to act like you're completely in love with me. Convincingly, no half effort. He pressed his hand to his chest. You wound me. I'm an excellent performer. And no one at the office can know it's fake. Agreed. He uncrossed his arms and took a step closer. The fluorescent light caught the edge of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. But I have conditions too. She narrowed her eyes. Like what? First, and you have to pretend to be just as in love with me. Full commitment. No cringing when I put my arm around you. Fine. Second. He paused, and the corner of his mouth curved upward. Try not to fall in love with me for real. I know it'll be hard. I'm told I'm irresistible. She stared at him for a long, flat second. Are you done? For now. She stood up, brushed dust off her skirt, and held out her hand. Deal. But if you mess this up, Cooper, I will end you. He shook her hand. His grip was warm, firm, and lasted exactly 1 second longer than it should have. Wouldn't dream of it, he said. And just like that, Stella Marshall, who had spent a full year swearing she'd hate Isaac Cooper forever, shook hands with her new fiancé. They met after hours in the small conference room on the 4th floor, the one nobody used because the air conditioning rattled like a diesel engine and the whiteboard still had someone's birthday lunch order from 3 months ago. Stella arrived first. She had a notebook, color-coded tabs, a timeline drafted in pencil. Isaac arrived 4 minutes late with a bag of chips and no plan at all. We need a story, she said, clicking her pen twice. How we got together, how long we've been dating, who made the first move. Everything has to be consistent. He dropped into the chair across from her and tore open the chips. Easy. I asked you out. You said yes. Done. Absolutely not. Why? Because no one who knows us would believe I said yes to you. He chewed slowly, watching her. Fine. What's your version? I was working late. You brought me coffee. We started talking. It grew from there. That's boring. It's believable. It's boring and it makes me sound like an errand boy. He leaned back, balancing the chair on 2 legs. How about this? We got stuck in traffic after a site visit. I made you laugh. You realized I wasn't the monster you thought I was. I never called you a monster. You called me a parking lot predator in front of Gary. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. That was accurate. They argued for 40 minutes. Who made the first move? Neither would budge. How long they'd been together? She said 4 months, he said 6. Where the first date happened, she wanted a bookstore. He wanted a rooftop bar. They settled, eventually, on a version that lived somewhere between their egos. They had been seeing each other for 5 months. The first date was dinner at a quiet Italian place on Bleecker Street. He had asked. She had said yes after making him wait 2 days. The proposal happened on a weekend trip upstate. Simple, private, no audience. See, he said, tossing the empty chip bag into the trash. We make a great team when you stop fighting me. I stopped fighting you because I ran out of energy, not because you won. He smiled, not the sharp, teasing grin she was used to. Something smaller, softer at the edges. It disappeared before she could study it. Over the next few days, the rehearsals continued. They practiced small things. How couples stand together. The unconscious lean of a shoulder toward a shoulder. The way one person finishes the other's sentence without thinking about it. She noticed, during one of these sessions, that Isaac listened differently when they weren't arguing. He didn't interrupt. His eyes stayed on her face, not scanning the room or checking his phone. He remembered that she took her coffee with oat milk, that she hated overhead lighting, that she always tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking, never the right. He noticed things no one else noticed. She filed that away and told herself it didn't matter. He, for his part, was beginning to realize that the woman who tripped over her own words when she was nervous was the same woman who could redesign a floor plan in 20 minutes and defend every decision without flinching. The chaos and the brilliance lived in the same person. He wasn't sure why that surprised him. It shouldn't have. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. Stella was in the file room again, standing on her toes to reach a box on the top shelf. She had kicked off her shoes, the heels made her ankles ache after lunch, and was stretching with one hand braced on the shelf when she felt him behind her. His arms circled her waist, slowly. His chest pressed against her back, warm and solid, and his chin dipped to the curve of her neck. Then his lips landed just below her ear, a slow, deliberate kiss that lasted long enough to send a shiver straight up her spine and across the back of her skull. She stopped breathing. Her fingers gripped the shelf. The metal was cold. His hands were warm. The contrast made everything sharper. The sound of his breath near her skin, the faint trace of his cologne, the way his thumbs pressed gently against her hip bones. She turned around. Her eyes were narrow, her cheeks flushed. "What are you doing?" "Staying in character." "There's no one here, Isaac." He glanced toward the open door with theatrical concern. "I thought I saw someone walk by." "You did not. Can't be too careful." He stepped back, hands raised in surrender, but his eyes were not apologizing. They were watching her the way someone watches a match they've just struck, waiting to see if it catches. "We're at work," she said, straightening her blouse. "This is not the place." "Noted." She turned her back to him and reached for the box again. Her hands were still shaking. She hoped he couldn't tell. He could. He left without another word, but as he walked down the corridor, he pressed his tongue against the inside of his cheek and exhaled through his nose. He could still feel the shiver that had run through her body when his lips touched her neck. It had traveled through her skin and into his, a small electric thing that he had no business thinking about. And Stella, alone in the file room, bit down on her lower lip, because she had liked it. Every second of it. She changed her outfit 4 times. The first was too formal. She looked like she was attending a funeral, not a dinner. The second was too casual, the kind of thing that said, "I forgot this was tonight." The third had a neckline that made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't ready for. The fourth was a black-fitted dress with thin straps and a hemline that hit just above the knee. Simple, elegant. The fabric had a slight sheen that caught the light when she moved, and she paired it with heels that added just enough height to feel like she belonged in a room full of people she was about to lie to. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her hands were trembling. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "You've been preparing. You know the story. You know the details." Her reflection did not look convinced. Isaac picked her up at 7:15. He drove a different car tonight. Not the sports car from the parking lot wore, but a clean dark sedan that smelled like leather and something woodsy she couldn't place. He was wearing a navy suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His jaw was freshly shaved, and when she got in the car, he looked at her for a beat too long before pulling out of the curb. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." He adjusted the mirror. "You clean up well, Marshall. Don't sound so surprised." The restaurant was a converted warehouse on the east side of the city. Exposed brick, soft lighting, long tables dressed in white linen. Martin Wells had booked the entire second floor. The room was already buzzing when they arrived, the hum of conversation mixing with the clink of glasses and the faint scent of garlic bread drifting from the kitchen. Isaac placed his hand on the small of her back as they walked in. His palm was warm through the thin fabric, and his fingers spread slightly, settling into the curve of her spine as if they had done this 100 times. She felt the pressure of his thumb against her lower back, firm, steady, and for a moment she forgot it was an act. Martin spotted them from across the room. "There she is." He crossed the floor with his arms open, his silver hair catching the light. "And this must be the fiancée." Isaac extended his hand. "Isaac Cooper. It's a pleasure, sir." "Cooper." Martin gripped his hand with both of his. "I've heard your name around the office. Structural, right? That's right. Good. A man who builds things. Martin looked at Stella with a warmth that made her chest tighten. You two make a beautiful pair. They were seated near the center of the table, visible, exposed, surrounded. Stella kept her napkin on her lap, and her smile locked in place. Beside her, Isaac leaned close enough that his arm rested against hers, the warmth of his skin bleeding through the sleeve of his jacket. He was good at this, better than she had expected. When someone asked how they met, he told the story they had rehearsed, the Italian restaurant, the 2-day wait, the quiet weekend upstate. But he added something she hadn't prepared for. He looked at her while he spoke, not at the person asking, at her, as if the memory were real and he were reliving it as he talked. She laughed at the right moments, touched his arm when she corrected a detail, let her fingers linger on his wrist when he poured her wine. The chemistry they had spent weeks pretending to build was slipping past the boundaries of performance. When he told the table he had known she was special from the first week, Stella felt something shift behind her ribs, a small dislocation, like a drawer opening that she hadn't meant to touch. She looked down at her plate. Across the table, she felt someone watching. Vanessa Cole sat 3 seats to the left, her dark hair pinned back, her posture razor straight, her eyes moving between Stella and Isaac like a camera searching for the frame that didn't match. Vanessa was a senior architect at Whitmore, 2 years ahead of Stella, and she had the kind of memory that catalogued inconsistencies the way a librarian catalogued books. She had never seen Stella and Isaac exchange anything but arguments. Now they were engaged. Vanessa said nothing during dinner. She smiled at the right moments. She complimented Stella's dress. But her gaze kept returning to small things, the way Isaac's hand hovered before landing on Stella's shoulder, the half-second delay before Stella leaned into him, the ring finger on Stella's left hand that was completely bare. After dessert, Isaac pulled Stella's chair out for her and guided her through the crowd with his hand on her waist. His grip tightened as they passed a narrow gap between tables, not a squeeze exactly, but a pull, closer than necessary. His thumb pressed against the curve of her hip, and she felt the warmth of his palm through the fabric like a brand. She glanced up at him. He wasn't looking at her, he was scanning the room, nodding at a colleague, completely composed, but his hand didn't move. And when they reached the other side of the room, he let go slowly, finger by finger, as if peeling himself away from something he wasn't ready to release. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled like rain. She leaned against the brick wall while he called for the car. That went well, she said. It did. Martin believed it. Everyone believed it. She nodded. Then, quieter. You were really convincing. He turned to look at her. The streetlight caught the edge of his cheekbone, the line of his jaw. So were you, he said. Neither of them spoke on the drive home. The silence was thick, charged with something neither was willing to name. He walked her to her door. She unlocked it and turned. Good night, Cooper. Good night, Marshall. She closed the door and pressed her back against it. Her heart was still racing, and for the first time, she wasn't sure who she had been pretending to be tonight, the fiancé or herself. Someone had chosen the bar on 9th Street, the one with the sticky tables and the jukebox that only played songs from decades nobody missed. It was a Friday tradition that Stella usually skipped, but now that she was half of Whitmore's favorite love story, skipping felt like a red flag she couldn't afford. She arrived late. The group had already claimed the big round table in the back corner, and every chair was taken. Gary from accounting was telling a story that involved hand gestures and sound effects. Linda from HR was laughing so hard, her drink was shaking. Isaac sat at the far end, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, a beer in front of him, looking completely at ease. He saw her before anyone else did. Stella, Gary waved her over. We saved you a... Oh, actually we didn't. He looked around. No empty chairs, not even a stool. Rebecca, one of the junior designers, grinned. Just sit on your fiancé's lap. That's what engaged people do, right? Stella's stomach dropped. Before she could form a single syllable of protest, Isaac reached out and hooked his hand around her waist. One quick pull, she fell against his chest, landing sideways on his lap, with a graceless thud that knocked the breath out of her. His arm locked around her immediately, casual, possessive, as if this happened every Friday night. The heat of his body pressed against her side, and she could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, steady and unhurried, while hers hammered like it was trying to escape. She sat rigid, a plank of wood with a pulse. "Relax," he murmured against her hair, low enough that only she could hear. "I am relaxed," she whispered back through clenched teeth. "You're sitting like you're waiting for a dental exam." She forced her shoulders down, tried to look natural, failed. Then he shifted beneath her, pulling her closer so her back rested against his chest. His hand settled on her hip, and his thumb traced a slow circle over the fabric of her jeans. Once, twice. The motion was small, almost lazy, but it sent a current through her skin that made her jaw tighten. He leaned forward. His lips brushed the spot just below her ear. Soft, warm, deliberate. The kiss lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough for her to feel his breath on her neck, the faint scratch of stubble against her skin, the way his lower lip dragged as he pulled away. She turned her head and glared at him. The look said everything. "Stop it. You're doing this on purpose. I will destroy you later." He smiled, slow, shameless. Then he caught her chin between his thumb and forefinger, gentle, like handling something fragile, tilted her face toward his, and pressed a kiss to the corner of her mouth. Not quite her lips, not quite her cheek, the exact borderline between innocent and dangerous. Her face burned. The table erupted. Gary whistled, Linda clapped. Rebecca said something about couple goals that Stella didn't fully hear because every nerve in her body was firing at once. She wanted to kill him. She wanted him to do it again. She reached for the nearest drink, someone's abandoned beer, and took a long sip without caring whose it was. Isaac's chest shook with silent laughter behind her. She elbowed him. He didn't stop. An hour passed. The conversation moved on. She eventually settled into the strange reality of being perched on Isaac Cooper's lap in a crowded bar, his arm draped around her like it belonged there. At some point, without thinking about it, she leaned her head back against his shoulder. He didn't react, but his hand tightened on her hip just slightly. A reflex he probably thought she didn't notice. She noticed. When the group started to thin out, Vanessa Cole slid into the newly empty chair beside them. She held a glass of white wine with the precision of someone who never spilled and the expression of someone who never missed a detail. "You two are adorable," Vanessa said. The word landed flat. "Thanks," Stella managed. "I have to say I was surprised. I had no idea you were even dating, let alone engaged." Vanessa tilted her head. "How long did you say you've been together?" 5 months. 5 months. Vanessa repeated it like she was filing it. "And already engaged, that's fast." "When you know, Isaac said. His voice was easy, his posture unchanged, but Stella felt his fingers press against her side. A signal. "Of course." Vanessa sipped her wine. "I just noticed you don't wear a ring, Stella. Most women can't wait to show it off." Stella's hand curled instinctively in her lap. "It's being resized. My fingers are smaller than he thought." "He didn't know your ring size?" Vanessa's eyebrow lifted a fraction of an inch. "I wanted it to be a surprise," Isaac said. "Didn't exactly have time to measure her finger in her sleep without looking like a creep." Gary laughed from across the table. Vanessa smiled, polite, contained, unconvinced. "And the wedding? Have you set a date?" "We're taking our time," Stella said. "No rush." "Smart. You want to make sure it's right." Vanessa set her glass down and stood. "Well, congratulations to you both, really." She walked away. Stella exhaled. Isaac's mouth found her ear again, but this time there was no kiss. Just words, low and warm. "She doesn't believe us." "I know." "We need to be more careful." Stella nodded. But careful was becoming harder by the minute, because somewhere between the kiss below her ear and the way his hand had tightened on her hip when she leaned into him, the line between performance and something real had started to blur, and she was no longer sure which side she was standing on. Saturday mornings belonged to Stella in a way no other time did. She had a routine, not a strict one, but the kind that felt like a warm blanket she could wrap around herself when the week had been too loud. She would walk to the cafe on Montague Street, the one with the wobbly table by the window, and the barista who always drew a crooked heart in her foam. She would order a vanilla latte, open whatever book she was pretending to read that month, and let the world outside move without her for an hour. This Saturday the world did not cooperate. She was 2 blocks from the cafe when she saw him. Isaac was sitting at one of the outdoor tables, his chair tilted back, a coffee in his hand, sunlight catching the line of his shoulders through a plain white t-shirt she had never seen him wear before. He looked different outside the office, looser, younger, like someone had turned down the sharpness by half a notch. He was not alone. A woman sat across from him. Dark hair, bright smile, a laugh that carried across the sidewalk like wind chimes. She leaned forward and touched his arm while she talked, and he, Isaac Cooper, the man who treated personal space like a religion with everyone except Stella, let her. He was smiling, not his usual smirk, a real, unguarded, open smile that Stella had never seen him aim at anyone. She stopped walking. Something inside her chest twisted, not a sharp pain, something duller, heavier, like a fist closing slowly around something she hadn't known was there. Her throat tightened. Her feet refused to move. She stood on the sidewalk holding her bag with both hands and watched the woman toss her hair back and laugh at something Isaac said, and the twist in her chest became a knot. She didn't go to the cafe. She turned around and walked home, made coffee in her own kitchen which tasted like disappointment and tap water, sat on the couch and stared at the wall and told herself over and over that she had no right to feel anything. This was a deal, a performance. He owed her nothing outside the script, but the knot didn't loosen. By Sunday night she had convinced herself she was angry, not jealous, angry. Because if he was going to parade around town with some woman while pretending to be her fiancée, the least he could do was be discreet about it. This was about professionalism, about the agreement, about not blowing their cover. It had nothing to do with the way his smile had looked in the sunlight, directed at someone who wasn't her. Nothing at all. Monday arrived and so did the coldness. She didn't look at him during the morning meeting. When he passed her desk and set a coffee beside her keyboard, the oat milk latte he had started bringing without being asked, she didn't touch it. He noticed. She could feel him noticing from across the room, the way you feel a change in temperature before you see the weather shift. He tried twice, once in the hallway, falling into step beside her, asking about the Belmont revisions. She answered in 3 words and turned the corner, once in the break room where she was rinsing her mug with her back to the door. "You're doing the thing," he said. "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend nothing's wrong by making everything feel like a freezer." She turned off the faucet. "I'm busy, Cooper." "You're avoiding me." "I said I'm busy." He studied her for a long moment. She could feel his gaze on the back of her neck like a fingertip tracing her skin. Then he exhaled through his nose and walked out. The day crawled. She threw herself into work, redrew a lighting layout 3 times, snapped at Rebecca for a question that didn't deserve snapping, and apologized immediately with the tired voice of someone fighting a war on the wrong front. At 5:30, she packed her bag and headed for the exit. He was waiting by the front door. She tried to walk past him. He stepped into her path. Stella. Her first name. He never used her first name at work. "Not now," she said. "Then when?" "Because you've been pretending I don't exist all day, and I'd like to know why before I start guessing." She pushed through the door and onto the sidewalk. The late afternoon air was warm and thick, carrying the smell of exhaust and hot pavement. She walked fast, heels clicking on the concrete, bag swinging at her side, jaw tight. He followed. "Marshall." She didn't stop. "Stella, would you just—" She spun around. The words came out before she could organize them, before she could pick the careful ones or line them up in any order that made sense. "You're making me look like an idiot. Do you understand that? I'm out here lying to my boss, lying to my co-workers, lying to everyone, and you're sitting in a cafe on a Saturday morning with some woman, laughing and touching and acting like this whole thing is a joke to you." He blinked. "If you want to see other people, fine. That's your life. But have the decency to do it somewhere people from the office won't see you while you're supposed to be engaged to me." "Stella, no, I'm not done. You don't get to play the charming, devoted fiancé on Friday night and then sit with someone else on Saturday like nothing happened. You either take this seriously or you don't, but you don't get to make me the fool." Her voice cracked on the last word. She hadn't expected that. The crack surprised her more than anything she had said, and she turned away from it, turned away from him, and started walking again. He called her name. She didn't stop. Then he did the only thing his body seemed to know how to do when logic failed. He closed the distance in 4 long strides, grabbed her around the waist and lifted her off the ground. She gasped. Then she was over his shoulder, actually over his shoulder, her legs kicking, her bag swinging wildly, her voice climbing to a pitch she didn't know she could reach. "Put me down." He didn't answer. He walked, steady, calm, infuriating, across the sidewalk toward his car parked at the curb. A woman walking a terrier stopped and stared. A man on a bench lowered his newspaper. "Isaac Cooper, I swear on everything I own." He opened the passenger door, set her down on the seat with more care than the situation deserved, and closed the door. She reached for the handle. He was already rounding the hood. By the time he slid into the driver's seat and pressed the lock button, she was fuming with her arms crossed so tight her knuckles ached. He didn't start the car. He sat there, both hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. Then he turned to her. "Her name is Brooke. She's my cousin." Silence. "She came up from Virginia to visit. She got in Friday night and we had breakfast Saturday morning because I haven't seen her in 8 months." Stella's arms didn't uncross. "I was going to tell you about her. I was going to introduce you, actually, because she won't stop asking about the girl from work I keep mentioning. But you didn't exactly give me a chance to explain before you started launching missiles." The car was quiet. The leather seat creaked beneath her. Outside, the terrier woman had moved on. The man with the newspaper was pretending not to watch. "Your cousin," Stella said. Her voice was flat. "My cousin." "The woman touching your arm." "She touches everyone's arm. She has no concept of personal space. She once hugged our mailman." Stella unfolded her arms slowly. Then she covered her face with both hands and sank into the seat like she was trying to disappear through the leather and into the floor beneath the car. "Oh, God. Yeah. In front of the office, I yelled at you on the sidewalk." "You did. And you carried me over your shoulder in public." "I did. Someone probably saw. Several people saw." She groaned into her palms. Her ears were hot. Her chest was a mess of relief and embarrassment, and something softer underneath that she wasn't ready to look at yet. He laughed. Quiet. Low. The kind of laugh that came from the belly, not the throat. "Stop laughing," she said, her voice muffled behind her hands. "Can't. This isn't funny. It's the funniest thing that's happened to me in years." She dropped her hands and looked at him. His eyes were warm in a way she had never seen before. Not teasing, not sharp, just warm. Like someone looking at a person they found endlessly, impossibly ridiculous, and liked that way. She looked away first. The silence that settled between them was different from any silence they had shared before. Not the charged silence of the car ride after the dinner, not the stiff silence of the office hallway. This one was soft, unhurried. The kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled because being in it together was enough. He started the car. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Food. You yell louder on an empty stomach." She almost smiled. He pulled away from the curb, and neither of them said another word until the restaurant. But somewhere between the 3rd red light and the 4th, she noticed that his hand had left the gear shift and come to rest on the center console, palm up, fingers open. She didn't take it, but she didn't move away either. Something shifted after that evening, and neither of them talked about it. The provocations didn't stop. They never would, not between two people who had built an entire language out of sarcasm and challenge. But the edges softened. The timing changed. Where before the jabs had been aimed to land, now they curved just before impact, leaving bruises that felt more like fingerprints than punches. He still called her Marshall in meetings. She still rolled her eyes when he disagreed with her layouts. But there were new things now, things that hadn't existed before the car ride, before the cousin, before the silence that had felt like the first honest thing between them. He started leaving coffee on her desk. Not every day. That would have been too obvious, and Isaac Cooper was nothing if not strategic. But every second or third morning, Stella would arrive at her workstation and find a to-go cup waiting beside her keyboard. Oat milk latte. No note, no explanation. Just the cup, still warm, placed at the exact angle where her right hand would naturally reach. She never thanked him out loud, but the first time it happened, she glanced across the office and found him already looking at her. He raised an eyebrow. She raised her cup, and something passed between them, invisible, unspoken, that felt more intimate than any rehearsed kiss. She started saving him a seat in meetings. It was a small thing. She would arrive early, which was rare enough to raise eyebrows, and set her notebook on the chair beside her, reserving it with the casual possessiveness of someone who didn't realize they were being possessive. When he arrived and sat down, their elbows would nearly touch. Sometimes they did. Neither pulled away. Gary noticed first. "You two fighting less, or am I going deaf?" he asked one Tuesday, leaning against the water cooler with the confused expression of a man whose entertainment had been cancelled. "We've reached a ceasefire," Stella said. "Temporary," Isaac added from across the room. But when he said it, he was looking at her, and the word landed softly, like a promise he didn't intend to keep. Linda from HR noticed second. She didn't say anything, but she quietly closed her betting pool, telling the 3 remaining participants that the outcome had become too obvious to be worth money. The small moments multiplied. One afternoon, during a client presentation, Stella's laptop froze mid-slide. The room went quiet. The client shifted in his chair. Stella's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her neck flushing red, the familiar panic rising in her chest like steam. Isaac stood from his seat and walked to the front of the room. He didn't touch her laptop. Instead, he turned to the client and started talking, calmly, easily, about the structural integrity of the building she had been presenting, pulling the attention away from her and onto himself. He talked for 4 minutes, just long enough for her to restart the file, reorganize her slides, and breathe. When she took over again, her voice was steady. She didn't look at him, but afterward, in the hallway, she caught his sleeve as he walked past. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, spoken low, her fingers still holding the fabric of his cuff. He looked down at her hand, then at her. "You had it handled," he said. "I just bought time." She let go. He walked away, but the place where her fingers had pressed against his wrist stayed warm for the rest of the afternoon, and he rolled his sleeve down over it, not to hide the feeling, but to keep it. The smaller company event came 2 weeks later, a Friday evening reception in the Whitmore lobby to celebrate the close of the Henderson project. Wine, cheese platters, soft jazz from a speaker someone had placed on the reception desk. Informal enough that people laughed freely, and loud enough that conversations overlapped. Stella stood near the window with a glass of red wine, talking to Rebecca about fabric sourcing for the new hotel project. Isaac was across the room, deep in a discussion with 2 of the junior engineers. Every few minutes his eyes would drift toward the window, toward her. She pretended not to notice. Vanessa Cole appeared at her side like smoke. One moment the space was empty. The next, Vanessa was there with her white wine and her careful smile, close enough that her perfume, sharp, expensive, deliberate, mixed with the smell of the cheese platter behind them. "Stella, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Where's your ring tonight?" The question was light, conversational. The tone was not. "Still being resized," Stella said. The lie was getting thin, and she could feel it stretch. "Must be a complicated resize." Vanessa tilted her head. "It's been weeks." Rebecca excused herself, sensing the shift in pressure the way animals sense earthquakes. Stella held her ground. "The jeweler is backed up. Custom work takes time." Vanessa swirled her wine. "You know what's funny? I was thinking about it the other day, before that dinner, before you told Martin. I never once saw you and Isaac together outside of arguments. Not once. No lunches, no after-work drinks, no casual conversation. And then suddenly engaged, just like that." Stella's grip tightened around her glass. The wine inside trembled. "People keep things private," she said. "They do, but 5 months of private. In this office?" Vanessa gestured at the room, the open floor plan, the glass walls, the complete absence of secrets. "That would take a level of discipline I don't think either of you has." The words landed hard. Stella felt the heat climb her neck. Vanessa wasn't done. She turned slightly, addressing the small cluster of colleagues who had gravitated toward the window. Dana, Gary, two of the project managers. Her voice was just loud enough to include them without shouting. I think it's just remarkable, honestly. The timing of everything. The engagement came right before the promotion cycle started. Nobody even knew they were dating. And has anyone actually seen the ring? She laughed, the kind of laugh designed to seem harmless. I'm just saying, if I were writing a novel, I'd call it suspicious. The group went quiet. Across the room, Martin Wells had been talking to one of the senior partners. But his head turned at the sudden silence near the window, the way a father turns when a room full of children goes too still. His eyes found Stella's face, then Vanessa's, then moved slowly to Isaac, who had stopped mid-sentence with the engineers and was watching the scene from across the lobby. Martin didn't say anything, but his expression changed. The warmth that had lived in his eyes since the night of the dinner, the pride, the fondness, the quiet approval, flickered. Not gone, but uncertain. Stella felt it like a cold draft through an open door. She excused herself, walked to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror and pressed her palms flat against the counter. The game was cracking. Vanessa was pulling at threads, and sooner or later the whole thing would unravel. Not because Vanessa was cruel. Stella understood that in a strange way. Vanessa was ambitious and observant, and she was doing what anyone in her position would do, questioning what didn't add up. The problem was that Vanessa was right. It didn't add up. And Martin had noticed. Stella looked at her reflection. The woman staring back at her had tired eyes and a jaw clenched so tight it ached. She had two choices: wait for the lie to collapse on its own, or tear it down herself before it buried her. She turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and for the first time since that impulsive afternoon in Martin's office, she knew exactly what she had to do. She didn't sleep that night. The ceiling of her apartment had a crack that ran from the light fixture to the corner, thin, jagged. The kind of imperfection she would never have allowed in a client's home, but had somehow ignored in her own for 3 years. She stared at it until the first grey light of morning crept through the curtains, and the crack became sharp enough to count every branch. By 6, she was showered. By 6:30, dressed. By 7, she was sitting in her car in the Whitmore parking lot, engine off, hands on the wheel, watching the building through the windshield like it might tell her what to do. It didn't. She went in anyway. Martin's office smelled the same as always. Leather, old paper, the faint sweetness of the peppermint candies he kept in a glass jar on the corner of his desk. The morning light came through the tall window behind him, casting long shadows across the floor. He was reading something when she knocked, his glasses low on his nose, his silver hair neatly combed. Stella. He looked up and smiled. You're early. I need to talk to you. Something in her voice made him set down his papers. He removed his glasses and placed them on the desk, with the slow precision of a man who had learned over 40 years of running a company to recognize the sound of trouble before it announced itself. Sit down. She sat. Her hands were clasped in her lap, fingers woven tight. The chair was the same one she had sat in the day she lied. She could feel the ghost of that moment pressing against her, the panic, the impulse, the words that had spilled out before she could catch them. I lied to you, she said. No preamble, no cushion, just the truth dropped onto the desk between them like a stone. Martin didn't move. I'm not engaged. I was never engaged. I made it up because I heard that you valued stability, and I panicked. I thought, I don't even know what I thought, that if I seemed like I had my life together, you'd take me more seriously, that having a fiancé would make me look like a grown-up. She paused, swallowed. The peppermint jar caught the light and threw a small rainbow onto the desk. Isaac and I aren't together. He agreed to help me because I was desperate, and he's a good person, even when he pretends not to be. The dinner, the story, all of it. None of it was real. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Martin sat back in his chair. His hands rested on the armrests, still and heavy. His face held no anger. That was the worst part. Anger she could have handled. What she saw instead was something quieter and harder to bear. Disappointment. I'm not going to make excuses, she continued, and her voice was steady now, steadier than she expected, as if the truth had given her a backbone the lie had stolen. I was impulsive and dishonest, and I understand if this changes how you see me. But I want you to know that my work, every project, every layout, every deadline I've met, that was real. All of it. I'm asking you to judge me on that, not on the image I tried to create. Martin was quiet for a long time. He looked at the window, then at the jar of peppermints, then at her. "You know what surprised me most at that dinner?" he said finally. His voice was low, measured, stripped of its usual warmth. "It wasn't the story. It wasn't how polished you two were. It was how proud I felt. I thought, there's a young woman who's got it figured out, career on the rise, a partner who looks at her like she's the only person in the room." He paused. "That's what makes this hard, Stella. Not the lie itself. The fact that I believed it so completely." Her eyes burned. She blinked once and felt the sting hold. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. "Not acceptance. Acknowledgement. I appreciate you telling me. I know that took courage. More courage than the lie took. And that's worth something." He picked up his glasses and turned them in his hands. "I need time to think about what this means for the promotion. I'm not making a decision today. I understand. What I will say is this. The work speaks. It always has. And I've never once questioned your talent. It's the judgment I need to think about." She stood. Her legs felt hollow, like someone had scooped the muscle out and left only the skin. She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on the frame. "Thank you for listening," she said. He didn't answer, but when she glanced back, he was looking at her with something that might have been the beginning of respect. Or maybe just the residue of what had been there before, not yet gone, not yet rebuilt. She made it to the stairwell before the weight hit. Not the weight of the confession. That, strangely, had lifted the moment the words left her mouth. The truth had cost her something, but it had also returned something she hadn't realized she had lost. Her spine, her name, the right to stand in a room without performing. No. The weight that hit her now was different. It was Isaac. With the lie dead, the framework that had held them together was gone. Every touch, every rehearsed glance, every kiss placed strategically for an audience, all of it had been part of an agreement. A deal made in a file room with fluorescent lights and archive boxes. He had done what he promised. He had played the part. And now the play was over. She pressed her back against the stairwell wall and closed her eyes. The coffee on her desk. The saved seats. The way he had stepped in during her presentation without being asked. She had started to believe those things meant something beyond the deal. But maybe they didn't. Maybe Isaac Cooper was simply that good at playing a role. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and walked down the stairs, each step echoing in the empty concrete shaft. By the time she reached her floor, her face was composed. Her posture was straight. But inside, something had cracked wider than the line on her ceiling, and she had no idea how to fix it. There was no coffee on her desk the next morning. She noticed immediately, the way you notice a sound that's been running in the background suddenly stop. The empty space beside her keyboard felt louder than the cup had ever been. She set down her bag, pulled out her chair and stared at the bare surface for 3 full seconds before sitting down. Across the open floor, Isaac was at his workstation. He didn't look up. The news had spread the way office news always does, not through announcements but through silence. No one mentioned the engagement. No one asked about the wedding. The absence of questions was its own kind of confirmation. People knew, maybe not the details, but enough. The fairy tale had ended, and the staff of Whitmore and Associates had the collective grace to pretend they hadn't been watching all along. Stella moved through her morning like a woman walking on a surface she didn't trust. She answered emails, reviewed material samples, made 2 phone calls that required nothing more than the professional half of her brain. The other half, the half that kept glancing toward the engineering section of the floor, she tried to shut off like a faucet. It didn't work. Isaac, for his part, was fighting a different battle. He sat at his desk with structural calculations open on his screen and saw none of them. The numbers blurred. The lines on the blueprint merged. All he could process was the conversation he'd had with Gary 20 minutes earlier, a casual passing comment in the hallway. "Heard the engagement's off," Tough break, man. He had nodded, said something about it being mutual, kept walking. But the truth was a different shape entirely. He wasn't hurt because the lie had ended. He had known from the start that it would. Lies had expiration dates, and this one had been stamped from the moment Stella shook his hand in the file room. What hurt, what sat in his chest like a piece of rebar lodged at the wrong angle, was that she hadn't seen it. Weeks. He had stopped pretending weeks ago. The coffee wasn't a prop. The saved seats weren't strategy. The way he had stepped in during her frozen presentation, pulling the room's attention onto himself so she could breathe, that wasn't part of any agreement. That was him. Just him. Doing what he did when someone he cared about was drowning. And she had looked at all of it and filed it under performance. He pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose and exhaled. The rational part of his brain, the engineer, the problem solver, the man who built structures that held weight, told him to go to her, to say the words out loud, to cross the 30 feet of office carpet between his desk and hers and tell her that every touch after the cousin incident had been real. But Isaac Cooper's pride was not a small thing. It was load-bearing. It held up walls he had built over years, walls that kept him steady, composed, untouchable. And the idea of standing in front of Stella Marshall and admitting that she had gotten under those walls, only to hear her say she hadn't noticed, was a weight he wasn't sure the structure could hold. So he stayed at his desk, and she stayed at hers. The day passed like fog, slow, thick, colorless. They didn't speak in the hallway. They didn't cross paths in the break room. When a meeting required both of them, they sat on opposite sides of the table and addressed their comments to the project manager between them, never to each other. Rebecca noticed. She looked between them with the wide eyes of someone watching two friends walk in different directions after an argument she hadn't heard. She opened her mouth to ask Stella about it during lunch. Stella's expression stopped her. By the second day, the distance had calcified. Stella ate lunch at her desk. Isaac left the building entirely, walking 2 blocks to a sandwich place he hadn't been to in months, just to avoid the break room. When their names appeared together on a project email, neither replied to the other directly. She told herself this was expected. The deal was done. The lie was exposed. There was no reason for Isaac Cooper to bring her coffee or save her a seat or stand in front of a room full of people to shield her from embarrassment. He had been fulfilling a contract, and the contract was void. She almost believed it, but at night alone in her apartment with the cracked ceiling and the too quiet kitchen, the belief unraveled. She would remember the way his hand had rested palm up on the center console of his car, open, waiting, asking without asking. She would remember the look in his eyes after the cousin confession, warm, unguarded, aimed at her like a light he hadn't meant to turn on. And she would think, what if it wasn't all pretend? Then she would shake her head and pull the blanket tighter and tell herself she was doing the thing she always did, seeing more than was there because she wanted it to be there. He lay awake too. Different apartment, different ceiling, same silence. He replayed every moment he should have spoken and hadn't. The car ride home after the dinner, when the silence had begged for words and he had swallowed them. The morning after the cousin fight, when he had left the coffee on her desk and walked away instead of staying. The dozen small chances to say something real, not clever, not sharp, not wrapped in sarcasm, just real. He had missed every one. His phone sat on the nightstand. Her name was in his contacts. He could call, he could text. He could type 3 words that would tear down every wall he had built and leave him standing in the open with nothing between them. He picked up the phone, stared at the screen, put it down, rolled over, and the distance between 2 people who were too proud to speak and too afraid to be wrong grew wider in the dark, not because they didn't care, but because they cared so much that the risk of being the only one who did was more than either could bear. The elevator on the east side of the building was old, slow, and had a reputation for groaning between the 3rd and 4th floors like a tired animal climbing a hill. Everyone at Whitmore knew it. Most people took the stairs, but at 5:40 on a Wednesday afternoon, when the rest of the office had already emptied and the stairwell felt like a tunnel she didn't have the energy to walk through, Stella pressed the button and waited. The doors slid open. Isaac was inside. He stood against the back wall, jacket slung over one arm, his tie loosened to the second button. He looked like he hadn't slept well, a faint shadow beneath his eyes, his hair pushed back in the way it got, when he'd been running his hand through it all day. He saw her, and his jaw tightened. But he said nothing. She almost turned around. But turning around would mean admitting something she wasn't ready to name, so she stepped in, pressed the button for the lobby, stood against the opposite wall, as far from him as the small metal box allowed. The doors closed. The elevator hummed. The floor numbers counted down, 4, 3, then a sound. A deep mechanical groan followed by a shudder that ran through the walls and up through the soles of her shoes. The lights flickered. The elevator stopped. Stella grabbed the handrail. Isaac didn't move. The fluorescent panel above them buzzed once, dimmed, then settled into a weak yellow glow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Silence. She pressed the lobby button again. Nothing. Pressed the emergency button. A distant beep sounded somewhere above them, followed by more nothing. "Great," she whispered. He didn't respond. The minutes stretched. 1, 2, 5. The air inside the elevator was warm and close, carrying the faint scent of his cologne, the same one she had smelled in the file room in his car, in every moment where he had been near enough for her senses to memorize him without permission. She pressed her back harder against the wall, as if she could push through it. He stood perfectly still. His eyes were on the floor. His breathing was even, controlled. The breathing of a man holding himself together with the same discipline he used to hold up buildings. She spoke first. She had to. The silence was pressing against her chest like a physical thing. "You don't have to pretend anymore." He looked up. "The deal's done," she continued. Her voice was quieter than she wanted it to be. "Martin knows. Everyone knows. You're free. You don't owe me anything." He stared at her. The weak light carved shadows into the angles of his face, the line of his jaw, the ridge of his brow, the hollow at the base of his throat, where his pulse moved slow and steady. "You are," he said, "the smartest and the most stupid person I have ever known." She blinked. "What?" He pushed off the wall. One step. The elevator was small enough that one step cut the distance between them in half. Every detail, every clue, every single thing I did that wasn't in the script, and you filed it all under acting. Her lips parted. No sound came out. "The coffee, Stella. Every morning. The seat I knew you'd save because you started arriving early just to put your notebook on the chair next to yours. The presentation. When your screen froze and I stood up because watching you panic felt like someone was pressing a boot against my chest." Another step. The distance between them was barely an arm's length now. None of that was the deal, none of it. Her back was against the wall. She couldn't move further. Her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it in the metal silence. "I stopped pretending weeks ago," he said. His voice was low, stripped of every layer of sarcasm and wit and armor he usually wore. Just raw. Just him. Every touch after that night in the car was real. Every look. Every time I kissed the corner of your mouth and told myself it was for the audience. There was no audience, Stella. There was just you, and I couldn't stop. Her eyes burned. She felt the heat build behind them, felt her vision blur at the edges. "You were the only one who didn't see it," he said. "Everyone else did. Gary, Linda, even Vanessa, in her own twisted way. The whole office saw what was happening, except the one person it was happening to." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. He raised his hands, slowly, carefully. The way someone reaches for something they're afraid will disappear if they move too fast. His palms settled against her jaw, warm, steady, his thumbs resting just below her cheekbones. He tilted her face up. She could feel his breath on her lips, could see the small scar near his left eyebrow she had never noticed before, could count the shades of brown in his eyes, darker at the edges, lighter near the center, like wood grain. "Tell me I'm wrong," he whispered. "Tell me you felt nothing and I'll walk away." She couldn't speak. Her throat was closed and her chest was full and her hands were trembling at her sides. So she answered a different way. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him down to her. The kiss was nothing like the rehearsed ones. No strategy, no audience, no excuse waiting on the other side. His mouth met hers, and the sound she made, small, broken, relieved, vibrated against his lips. He kissed her deeper, one hand sliding to the back of her neck, the other pressing against the wall beside her head. She tasted salt from her own tears, and the faint bitterness of coffee, and the warmth of something that had been building for weeks, trapped under layers of pride and sarcasm and fear. His forehead dropped to hers. They breathed the same air. Her fingers were still twisted in his shirt. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "You're worse," he whispered back. She laughed. It came out wet and shaky and cracked in the middle, and he kissed her again, softer this time, slower. The kind of kiss that wasn't trying to prove anything but simply refused to end. The elevator shuddered. The lights brightened. The floor numbers blinked back to life, and the car resumed its slow descent with a mechanical groan that sounded, for once, almost satisfied. Neither of them moved. When the doors opened to the empty lobby, they stepped out together. His hand found hers, not a grab, not a pull, just a settling. His fingers laced through hers and held. She held back. They walked through the lobby and into the evening air without saying a word. The sky was bruised purple and orange. The street smelled like warm pavement and the last breath of summer. And for the first time in weeks, the silence between them held no distance at all. He took her to a small Italian place 3 blocks from his apartment, not the invented one on Bleecker Street from their rehearsed story, but a real one, with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles and a waiter who called everyone sweetheart without irony. They didn't talk about the elevator. Not yet. Instead, they talked the way 2 people talk when a wall has come down, and they're still blinking in the light. Carefully, honestly, with the occasional laugh that came from relief rather than humor. She told him about the morning she saw him with Brooke at the cafe, how something had twisted inside her that she couldn't name, how she had gone home and made terrible coffee and sat on the couch and tried to convince herself it was about the agreement. "It wasn't about the agreement," she said. "I know," he said. He told her about the phone, how he had picked it up 2 nights in a row, her name on the screen, and put it back down, how the distance between her desk and his had felt like crossing an ocean without a compass. "Why didn't you call?" she asked. He turned his fork slowly on the plate. "Because if I told you how I felt, and you said it was all just the deal to you, I wouldn't have been able to walk back from that." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He turned his palm up. Their fingers locked. The candle between them flickered. After dinner they walked. The night air was cool and carried the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. She wore his jacket over her shoulders, the sleeves hanging past her wrists, the collar still warm from his body. Their steps fell into rhythm, unhurried, synchronized, the kind of walking that has no destination because the company is the point. His apartment was on the 6th floor of a brick building with a narrow lobby and an elevator that worked better than the one at Whitmore. The hallway smelled like old wood, and someone's cooking from a few doors down. He unlocked the door, held it open, and she stepped inside. She barely had time to register the space. Bookshelves lining one wall, a drafting table near the window, the clean lines of a man who valued structure even at home, before he pulled her toward him by the waist. She let him. Her back met the wall with a soft thud. She lifted her hands and held his face between her palms, her thumbs tracing the edges of his jaw. She looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to before. The small scar near his eyebrow. The dark brown of his eyes, serious now, searching hers as if asking a question he hadn't put into words. He leaned his forehead against hers. His breath was warm and uneven. "Weeks," he said quietly. "I haven't been able to think about anything else for weeks." She smiled. It was a small, trembling thing. "I wanted this so badly," she whispered. "I didn't know how to say it." She kissed him before he could answer. He laughed against her mouth, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest and into hers, and the laugh became something else, something deeper. His hands traveled up her back, slow and careful, fingers tracing the line of her spine through the fabric of her blouse, as though he were learning her the way he learned blueprints. Every angle, every curve, every place where one thing met another. She pulled at his collar, drew him closer. His cologne filled her lungs, cedar and warmth and something underneath that was simply him, closer than she had ever been, more real than she had imagined. He lifted her from the floor without effort. Her legs circled his waist, and her arms wrapped around his neck, and the sound she made, half surprise, half relief, was swallowed by his kiss. The walk to the bedroom was clumsy, interrupted by laughter and a doorframe he nearly missed, and a shoe she kicked off that landed somewhere neither of them cared about. In the bedroom, the pace changed. He laid her down gently, knelt beside her, pushed the hair from her face with both hands, and looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. Not hunger, something more patient than that. Devotion, maybe. The kind of attention that sees everything and still wants to look closer. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with clothing. She felt seen. He kissed her forehead, then her temple, then the curve of her neck, where her pulse beat hard and fast against his lips. Every touch was slow, deliberate, a man who was in no hurry because the moment mattered more than the destination. She pulled him closer. He came willingly. And when the last distance between them disappeared, the sound she made was quiet and honest, and his arms tightened around her as though she were something precious he had just been trusted to hold. Afterward, the sheets were tangled at the foot of the bed, and the room smelled like warmth and skin. She lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heart find its way back to normal. His fingers traced absent patterns on her arm, circles, lines, shapes that had no name. "You should have sat on my lap sooner," he said. She swatted his chest. He caught her hand and kissed it. The silence that followed was the softest thing she had ever heard. The email came 3 days later. She was at her desk, reviewing material pallets for the new hotel lobby, when the notification appeared. Subject line: promotion, lead architect position. Sender: Martin Wells. Her hand froze on the mouse. She opened it. Read it once, read it twice. Then pressed her palm flat against the desk and exhaled through her mouth like someone surfacing from deep water. The position was hers. Martin had written the email himself. Not a template, not a form. His words were specific and deliberate. He cited the Haverford building, the Henderson project, 3 client reviews that had praised her instincts and her ability to translate a vague vision into something concrete and beautiful. And then, at the end, a line that made her eyes sting. He wrote that talent earns attention, but character earns trust, and that she had shown him both, the talent in her work and the character in walking into his office and telling the truth when silence would have been easier. She sat at her desk and read that last line 3 times. Then she looked across the office. Isaac was leaning back in his chair, phone in hand, oblivious. She didn't call his name, didn't wave. She just looked at him. The man who had handed her coffee without asking, stood up in meetings to protect her without being asked, confessed in a broken elevator that he had stopped pretending long before she had stopped being afraid. He glanced up, caught her staring, raised an eyebrow. She mouthed 2 words. "I got it." His face changed. Not a grin. Something wider, warmer, a smile that started in his eyes and travelled outward until his whole expression belonged to her. He mouthed back, obviously. She laughed, and the sound carried across the open floor like a door finally fully opening. 3 months changed everything and nothing. Everything, because the pretending was over. They ate breakfast together on weekends. They argued about paint swatches for her apartment, the way they used to argue about ceiling heights, except now the arguments ended with his arm around her waist and her head against his shoulder, and a colour neither of them had originally picked. He kept a toothbrush at her place. She kept a drawer at his. The edges of 2 separate lives were slowly, quietly folding into one. Nothing, because Isaac Cooper still stole her parking spot every single Monday morning, without fail, without remorse. "It's tradition," he said when she confronted him about it in the lobby, her coffee in one hand and her bag, still broken, still refusing to zip, in the other. "It's war," she corrected. He kissed her forehead and walked away, whistling. The restaurant he chose was on the Upper East Side. Small, candlelit, the kind of place where the menus had no prices and the bread arrived warm in a linen cloth. She had raised an eyebrow when he told her to dress up. He never told her to dress up. He was the kind of man who would take her to a taco stand in a suit jacket and call it fine dining. Something was different. She noticed it during the appetizer. His hand kept moving to his jacket pocket, A small, quick gesture, barely visible, like checking for a wallet, except he checked 4 times in 10 minutes. His posture was straighter than usual. His laugh came half a beat late. Isaac Cooper was nervous. She had never seen him nervous, not before the dinner with Martin, not before the happy hour, not even in the elevator when he had ripped open his own chest and handed her the contents. That night he had been raw, but not nervous. This was different. This was a man sitting across from the woman he loved and trembling inside the composure he wore like a second skin. She set down her fork. "What's going on?" "Nothing." "You've touched your pocket 6 times. "I'm checking my phone." "Your phone is on the table." He looked down. It was. He closed his eyes briefly and exhaled through his nose, the kind of breath she had come to recognize as the sound of Isaac Cooper losing a battle with himself. Dessert arrived. A small plate of dark chocolate mousse with a single raspberry on top. The waiter set it between them and disappeared with a nod that lasted a fraction too long. Isaac pushed back his chair. Then he stood. Then he walked around the table, and Stella's heart began to climb her ribs like a ladder. He knelt, one knee on the polished hardwood floor, his hand reaching into the jacket pocket that had been burning a hole in his composure all evening. He pulled out a small velvet box, dark blue, simple, and opened it in front of her. The ring inside was elegant and understated, a single stone set in a thin gold band, not flashy, not loud, exactly her. "Stella Marshall," he said. His voice was steady now, the way a man's voice gets when he stops fighting the moment and lets it carry him. "I have spent a year arguing with you, 3 months pretending to love you, and every day since realizing that the pretending was the only lie I ever told." Her hand covered her mouth, her vision blurred. "Will you marry me? For real this time? No script, no audience. Just you and me and the fact that I can't imagine a single morning where I don't want to steal your parking spot and bring you coffee you never thank me for." She laughed. It came out broken and wet, and her mascara was already done for. "Yes," she said. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood and she stood with him, and before he could say another word, she grabbed his face with both hands and kissed him, hard, honest, tasting like chocolate and tears and the kind of happiness that doesn't ask for permission. He pulled back just enough to speak. "So you finally admit it." "Admit what? That I'm the best option you're ever going to find?" She laughed against his mouth, her forehead pressed to his, tears still sliding down her cheeks. "Shut up. Make me." She kissed him again, and behind them, around them, the restaurant broke into applause. Strangers clapping for 2 people they didn't know, caught up in a moment that needed no explanation. He held her. She held him. And the ring on her finger, real, solid, warm from his pocket, caught the candlelight and scattered it across the tablecloth, like tiny stars that had finally found a place to land. The wedding happened on a late afternoon in September, when the sky was the color of warm honey and the air smelled like cut grass and the last breath of summer. They chose a garden outside the city, not a grand venue, not a ballroom, not anywhere that tried too hard. Just a wide lawn bordered by old oak trees, string lights hanging between the branches, and rows of wooden chairs filled with the people who mattered. No more, no less. Brooke was a bridesmaid. She cried during the vows, laughed during the readings, and gave a toast that included the phrase, "I knew before either of them did, and nobody listened to me." She pointed at Isaac with her champagne glass and told the guests that the first time he mentioned Stella's name, he had called her impossible, and then talked about her for 45 minutes straight. Isaac shook his head from the head table. Stella squeezed his hand under the tablecloth. Vanessa Cole did not attend. But a large arrangement of white peonies arrived before the ceremony, accompanied by a handwritten card. The note was short, 2 lines of careful, honest script. She apologized for the way she had handled things. She wished them well. No excuses, no explanations beyond what was necessary. Stella read it twice, then tucked it into her bag. She would send a reply later. Not today. Today was for other things. Martin Wells stood during the reception, a glass of champagne in his hand, and the expression of a man who had seen enough of the world to know when something was worth celebrating. The crowd quieted. "I've been running this company for a long time," he said. "Long enough to know that people surprise you. Sometimes they disappoint you. And once in a very great while, they do both, and somehow end up better for it." He looked at Stella, then at Isaac. "I have never," he said, "seen a lie turn into such a beautiful truth." The garden erupted, glasses raised, hands clapped. Somewhere near the back, Gary whistled loud enough to scare a bird out of the nearest oak tree. Isaac leaned toward Stella's ear. "He's a good man." "He is. Better boss than I deserve." "That part's accurate." He smiled against her hair. She closed her eyes and let the sound of the applause wrap around them like a blanket. The first dance was simple. No choreography, no elaborate song choice. Just a slow melody from a string quartet Brooke had insisted on hiring, and two people holding each other the way they had learned to over months of pretending and weeks of being real. His hand rested on the small of her back, her fingers curled against his shoulder. They swayed more than they danced, and neither cared. "You know," he murmured, "technically this is our second engagement. The first one doesn't count." "It absolutely counts. I was very committed." "You were contractually obligated." "Same thing." She laughed into his collar, and the sound got lost in the music and the evening air and the rustle of oak leaves above them. The house sat on a quiet street lined with maples that turned gold every October. They had designed it together. Of course they had. She chose every surface, every color, every angle of light that entered through the windows she had positioned to catch the morning sun in the kitchen and the evening glow in the living room. He built the bones, the foundation, the structure that held it all up, invisible and essential. The way he held most things. The kitchen was warm. It smelled like toast and orange juice, and the particular chaos of a weekday morning in a home with small children. A drawing was taped to the refrigerator, a crayon family standing in front of a house with a triangle roof and a yellow sun with long, uneven rays. The artist had signed it with a wobbly S. A small girl came running around the corner, bare feet slapping against the tile, dark hair flying behind her. She crashed into Stella's legs with the full-body commitment of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned the concept of gentle. "Mama!" Stella caught her and lifted her onto her hip. "Good morning, tornado." Isaac appeared seconds later, a smaller child balanced on one arm, a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin, fist wrapped around a piece of toast he had no intention of eating. Isaac's hair was a mess. His shirt had a stain on the shoulder that might have been jam or might have been something worse. He looked like a man who had been awake since 5 and wouldn't trade a second of it. Stella looked at him across the kitchen, this man who had stolen her parking spot and her composure and her heart, in roughly that order, and shook her head. "You're still taking things that are mine," she said. "Now you've taken the whole thing. Every last piece." He crossed the kitchen, leaned down and kissed her forehead, then the corner of her mouth, then the top of their daughter's head. "I got here first," he said. She smiled. "Law of the jungle. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference."